Hello, lovelies! You're listening to episode 46 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening! With Knistrith leading her by the hand, Janir followed the other Arghitalum through the maze of white stone corridors to the private dining hall. The Banquet Hall, the room used on special occasions and to entertain state visitors, was much grander, or so Knistrith told her. Yet when a pair of double doors were opened by servants with gold collars, Janir was mesmerized. The craftsmanship and intricate detail of the room were breathtaking. It was all cream-colored limestone, no wood or metal to be seen. The ceiling and walls had been carved with the twisting scene of a battle between Drell, the first Arghitalum, and the Mazag, the creatures he was created to defeat. In the middle of the room was a low oak table, situated on a thick crimson carpet. Instead of chairs, luxurious pillows were placed around the table's edge. Janir entered behind Knistrith, keeping her aunt between her and the group of people, all Arghitalums except for two. The Lord Arghitalum was there, of course, as was her brother Lucan, looking subdued and sullen in the back of the room. But Janir hadn't seen Lucan since awakening. How did she recognize him and none of the others? There was an Arghitalum Mortana about 5 or 6 years older than Janir, who had been speaking with another Arghitalum woman in a blue gown that rippled like water every time she moved. Standing beside the woman in blue was a lanky boy, slightly younger than Janir, face already strong-set, determined. He was Kestrel, she guessed, her second brother. The woman in blue beside him must be his mother, Drusilla. Knistrith had told her who would be here, and Janir had only to make educated assumptions. There was a Slavish woman, with her hair done in braided loops, that made Janir think of coiled snakes. Janir expected she was Bryson, Lucan's mother. Bryson shot Janir a glance that was an odd mixture of disdain and self-satisfaction, but the look melted away so fast Janir wondered if she had seen it at all. There was also an Aracelian woman, probably Tethansian, like Genvissa, standing silently by herself. The Lord Arghitalum's third concubine, his replacement for Janir's mother. Knistrith had never mentioned her name. Janir. The Lord Arghitalum turned to her immediately, as did everyone else. She shrank from their stares, feeling that they would find her lacking in something if they looked too closely. Come, my child. The Lord Arghitalum beckoned. Janir hesitantly stepped from behind Knistrith and took her place beside her father. He began presenting everyone in the room. You remember, Knistrith, your brother Lucan. This is your brother Kestrel. Kestrel bowed, and his mother Drusilla. Drusilla copied her son's action. Drusilla was familiar with her athletic build and her swift, precise motions. But then, she should be, shouldn't she? The Lord Arghitalum briefly referred to Bryson and the Tethansian woman only as his concubines, and then dismissed them. The two women bowed and left, Bryson casting glances at Janir over her shoulder. Knistrith took the hand of the young Arghitalum woman who had been speaking with Drusilla. Janir, this is my daughter, Amila Arghitalum. Janir actually recalled from her lessons that Caractic was the name given to Arghitalums when the surname of their father or non-Arghitalum mother was unknown. Even though it gave Janir a bit of a thrill to have remembered, she wasn't sure it was something she should mention. Janir closely surveyed her kinswoman. Amila had a sturdy, rugged kind of pulchritude about her. She didn't fit the conventional beauty of a fair young damsel, but Janir thought that there were still plenty of men who would have found her enticing. I'm glad to see you're recovering so well from your misfortune, cousin. There seemed to be some sort of agreement that her abduction and torture were to forever be the misfortune. "Thank you." Janir swallowed the lump of awkwardness in her throat. How was she supposed to introduce herself to people she already knew? "Amila is one of the foremost practitioners of Cheton Shrai in Adasha," Knistrith proudly added. Janir cringed. That practice was what had damaged her mind and left her covered in sores. Most of the physical wounds were fading, but the ones of the mind might last forever. Amila demurely lowered her eyes. "Mother, I am not certain the princess wishes to hear of such things." Knistrith beamed at her daughter. "You are modest, my dear." "No, I meant—" Amila's gaze flickered to Janir briefly. "Shall we proceed to the meal?" Amila suggested to the Lord Arghitalum, almost as if she was trying to brush the conversation aside. Janir was grateful, though it might not have been for her sake. Janir's father agreed. Everyone took their places at the table, with the Lord Arghitalum at the head and Janir opposite him at the foot. Knistrith seated herself to Janir's left, and Lucan casually slipped onto the pillow to her right. Knistrith raised one eyebrow at Lucan, almost as if she was cautioning him, but then dropped it as soon as she realized Janir had seen. Servants brought their food on wooden dishes. The first course was pomegranates and other native fruits, followed by the second course, comprised of rice covered with spicy peppers and tender slices of beef in an herb sauce. Amila, Drusilla, and Knistrith were the only ones who did much talking during the meal, though they laughed often enough that it seemed to make up for everyone else. Lucan hardly said a word, though he kept glancing at Janir sideways, waiting for her to say or do something. The Lord Arghitalum would occasionally put in a word of agreement or argument, but for the most part he appeared not to be in a mood for banter. Kestrel took in every word Drusilla and the others spoke, attentively tracking their conversation as if he would have to recite it later. He smiled once, when Drusilla playfully ruffled his hair, but other than that, he hardly acted human. After dinner, the whole family went to a flat dais in the garden for the evening's entertainment. The Lord Arghitalum, Knistrith, and Drusilla elected to sit on stone benches at the edge of the dais, but everyone else made themselves comfortable on the tiles that covered the ground. Janir sat a little to one side by herself. Lucan came and sat cross-legged nearby, but Amila casually wedged herself between them. It seemed odd, but Janir made no comment. A squat man in a yellow tunic waddled to the middle of the dais and blathered for minutes about how he hoped that the skills of his performers would please the Arghitalum royal family, and what an honor it was to perform for the Arghitalum royal family, and how he was grateful to the Arghitalum royal family. Finally, his speech ended and his performers took the dais. Fire dancers, wearing next to nothing, with painted skin, swirled and snapped to the thundering beat of drums and the playful notes of a flute, turning the dais into a spectacle of spinning flame. Janir watched for a while, fascinated by the quick and nimble motions of the dancers, so perfectly in tune with the melody. But soon the rumbling beat of the drums began to give her another headache. She massaged her temples, trying to ease away the throb. Not long after, the light from the fire became a nuisance, and she began to feel ill. When she was sure Knistrith wasn't watching, Janir quietly slipped off to the side. No one heard her leave over the music or noticed her go for the spinning torches. Janir didn't stop until she was far enough away that the thundering music no longer rattled her skull. She sat on a bench, trying to clear her head. Once her skull felt somewhat normal, Janir rose and meandered through the tended hedgerows and neatly trimmed flower beds. Somewhere in the garden, a nightingale serenaded his mate. A crescent moon peered out from a sky of twinkling stars. A chilly breeze blew across Janir's face and tousled her hair. Back at the dais, with all the fire, the cold had hardly been noticeable. Janir found herself near the fountain houses. She glanced back over her shoulder and could see the swirling lights through the rows of greenery. Frowning, she noticed an Arghitalum's presence trailing her. It was probably Knistrith or one of the guards, but if they hadn't called to stop her, she would carry on. After thinking about it a moment, Janir went into her favorite fountain house, an open stone pavilion with a series of tiered basins rising from the center of a stone pool. She had always been fond of the white water lilies and the brightly colored koi that placidly swam through the clear water. Sitting on the edge of the fountain, Janir dragged her fingertips across the water's surface, watching the ripples over the orange, black, and white fish. Her mother had once told her about a humble field worker who had fallen in love with a princess. He then made a deal with a witch so he could be turned into a fish in the princess's fountain and see her every day. It was a silly fable, but it had a happy ending, even if Janir had forgotten exactly what it was. The Arghitalum's dark power came closer, footsteps padding quietly up from behind. She waited for Knistrith to ask her what she was doing. A black shadow tackled Janir to the ground before she could struggle. Something ripped through the sleeve of her gown, just under her armpit. An instant later, on the stone floor behind the fountain, Janir was staring up into the face of Lucan, while a crossbow bolt struck the tile wall. The arrow had passed through her gown, tearing a hole in the dress. Janir's eyes went wide as she searched her brother's face for answers. "Lucan, what's—" Lucan clamped a hand over her mouth. "Shush!" he snarled, shoving her back against the side of the fountain. For several moments, Lucan held Janir there, not letting her move. In the evening light, she could see him glaring wordlessly, ordering her to stay still and not make a sound. Janir's heart thudded so hard against her ribs that she wondered if her brother could hear it. For what seemed forever, there was no sound but her own racing heart and muffled breathing. Then came padding footsteps as someone stalked around the fountain, coming at them from their left. "Keep quiet. Don't move," Lucan tersely hissed, ducking low and creeping around the fountain in the direction of Janir's right. "Lucan, please." Janir bit her tongue as her brother left her behind. She braced her back against the stone, fighting to keep control of herself. There was no chance of her outrunning her attacker. She wasn't fast enough. Before she could decide, it was too late. The first thing to appear around the fountain was a long blade, giving off an ominous, light red glow. The knife had been coated in kimdrith, a poison used by assassins to guarantee the deaths of victims. One scratch with a tainted blade, and very few healers could save a victim's life, much less the wounded limb. The assassin was clad in a sort of light archer's armor, and hood with a slit across the front for his eyes. She should have moved, but she was paralyzed by fear. Without warning, the assassin's head snapped back, and a flash of steel was all Janir saw before her brother dragged a razor-sharp dagger across the assassin's neck. Blood sprayed as Lucan severed the veins and arteries. Janir cried out in horror as she was splattered in scarlet. The assassin's twitching body fell face first onto the ground at Janir's feet while crimson stained the stone floor. Janir gasped, speechless with shock. The assassin's blood was in her hair, on her face, and all over her gown. Trembling, Janir clawed away from the assassin's body, leaning against the side of the fountain for support, her breath coming in unsteady gasps. "Janir." Lucan stepped around the assassin's body to kneel at her side. "Did the arrow graze you? Are you all right?" Janir managed a nod. "I'm fine." "Stupid girl! What in the blazes were you doing out here by yourself?" I thought it was safe." "Obviously not." From across the lawn, a guard shouted. In moments, a half-dozen guards, most bearing torches, flooded into the fountain house. Janir shielded her eyes from the sudden light. A brief survey of the scene, Janir splattered in blood, Lucan with a dagger still in one hand, and the assassin's lifeless body bleeding on the floor, was explanation enough. Shock sent Janir back into her entropy of bewilderment. As she tried to wipe the blood off her face with her sleeve, the garden filled with cries of, "Treachery! Treachery!"
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.